A rich man made a donation to a nursing home and found his mother, who had been missing for 38 years. He walked into that nursing home as a billionaire trying to fix his image, but walked out shattered, face to face with a ghost he believed long buried. When that frail woman whispered, "Robbie," everything he built began to crumble. The bitter January wind whipped through Pittsburgh's Oakland district as Garrett Holloway stepped out of his Bentley in front of Willow Ridge Nursing Home. At 43, he'd built Holloway Industries into a steel manufacturing empire that employed thousands across Pennsylvania, but today he wasn't here as CEO. The building before him, with its weathered brick facade and modest signage, seemed woefully inadequate for its purpose. "Mr. Holloway, we're honored to have you," gushed Director Abigail Winters, a thin woman with prematurely gray hair and tired eyes that had witnessed too much suffering. "Your donation will transform our facility." "I'd like to see what you're working with first," Garrett replied, his voice carrying the authoritative edge that intimidated board members and competitors alike. The tour revealed everything he expected: outdated medical equipment, crumbling infrastructure, and overworked staff. Yet the residents' eyes held a quiet dignity that unsettled him. He'd come because his PR team suggested a local charitable gesture might soften the public backlash from recent layoffs. Now, surrounded by these forgotten elders, the cynicism of his visit felt suffocating. "Our memory care unit is particularly challenged," Abigail explained, leading him down a hallway with faded floral wallpaper. "Many residents require specialized attention we simply can't provide adequately." Garrett nodded absently, already mentally drafting the press release announcing his contribution. That's when he saw her. She sat in a wheelchair by the window, her silver hair falling in soft waves around hollow cheeks. Though age had etched deep lines across her face, something about her delicate hands, folded carefully in her lap, triggered a visceral recognition that stopped him cold. "That patient," he managed, his voice suddenly hoarse. "What's her name?" "That's Elaine," Abigail replied. "Elaine Warren. She's been with us nearly 4 years. Early onset dementia, unfortunately." Some days are better than others. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Garrett's expensive leather shoes. Warren had been his mother's maiden name. "How old is she?" he asked, struggling to maintain composure. "According to her records, she'll be turning 71 next month. She was transferred here from a facility in Cincinnati." 71. The age his mother would be now, if she were still alive. If she hadn't disappeared on a rainy Tuesday morning when he was just 5 years old. "Does she have family?" The question barely made it past the tightness in his throat. "None that we know of. She was found disoriented at a bus station years ago with minimal identification. Her case is actually quite sad." But Garrett had stopped listening. He moved toward the woman as if pulled by an invisible thread. Her eyes, the same unusual hazel green as his own, lifted to meet his. For a moment, there was nothing but confusion in her gaze. Then something flickered, a shadow of recognition perhaps. "Robbie?" she whispered, using a nickname no one had called him since childhood. The floor beneath Garrett disappeared completely. 38 years of constructed identity collapsed in an instant. His carefully built walls of success, wealth, and indifference crumbled at the sound of that single word from the lips of a woman he'd spent a lifetime trying to forget. The woman who had abandoned him on his 5th birthday had just called him by name. The following morning found Garrett pacing the polished floors of his penthouse overlooking Pittsburgh's skyline. Sleep had evaded him, replaced by a kaleidoscope of fragmented childhood memories, suddenly demanding re-examination. Outside, the city awoke to another workday, oblivious to his inner turmoil. "I've cleared your schedule for the week," said his assistant Meredith, setting a coffee on his desk. After 15 years managing his life, she knew better than to question his abrupt requests. The DNA testing facility called. They can expedite the results within 48 hours for an additional fee. "Money isn't an issue," Garrett replied, his voice hollow. "Have Marcus prepare the papers for the nursing home donation. $5 million instead of the planned $2 million. Meredith's eyebrows rose, but she simply nodded. Will there be anything else? Find everything you can about Elaine Warren. Where she's been, medical records, previous addresses, everything. Alone again, Garrett approached the wall of windows. The steel mills in the distance, his mills, seemed like they belonged to another man's life. Since yesterday, he'd existed in a fog, functioning on autopilot while his mind replayed the brief, devastating interaction. After that initial Robbie, Elaine had slipped back into confusion. The nurses explained it was common, momentary clarity followed by disorientation. They suggested he return today, during her typically more lucid morning hours. His phone rang. Bradford Hayes, his oldest friend and company COO. "What's this about canceling the Boston acquisition meeting?" Bradford demanded without preamble. "We've been working on this deal for months." "Something's come up," Garrett said, unwilling to elaborate. "Something more important than the largest expansion in company history?" Garrett watched a river barge loaded with steel move slowly along the Monongahela. "I might have found my mother." The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. "Your mother is dead," Bradford finally said, his tone gentler. "Has been for decades. That's what I believed. Now I'm not sure. Garrett, you've built your entire life around that certainty." My father told me what he thought would hurt least," Garrett interrupted. "At least that's what I've spent 38 years telling myself." The conversation ended shortly after, with Bradford promising to handle things temporarily. Garrett barely registered his friend's concern. His thoughts had already returned to the nursing home, to the frail woman with his eyes who might hold answers to questions he'd stopped asking long ago. By noon, he was back at Willow Ridge, this time escorted by a nurse named Violet, who specialized in dementia care. "Some days she speaks about a son," Violet explained as they walked. "She never mentioned a name until yesterday. We assumed it was confabulation. Many patients create memories to fill gaps." When they reached Elaine's room, she was sitting in a chair by the window, looking more alert than the previous day. A book lay open on her lap, though her eyes weren't focused on the pages. "Mrs. Warren, you have a visitor," Violet announced cheerfully. Elaine looked up, and the moment her eyes locked with Garrett's, he knew with bone-deep certainty that this woman was his mother. DNA tests suddenly seemed superfluous compared to the incontrovertible evidence of her expression. Fear, recognition, and something like longing, all fighting for dominance. "I know you," she said, her voice stronger than yesterday. "You're all grown up now." "Yes," Garrett managed, taking the chair Violet offered. "I'm Robert Garrett Holloway. People call me Garrett now." "Holloway," she repeated, as if testing the word. "You kept his name." The simple statement carried such weight that Garrett felt physically struck. Her eyes darted nervously toward the door. "Is he with you?" she asked, her voice suddenly childlike with fear. "Who?" "Thomas," she whispered. "Your father." The floor seemed to shift under Garrett once again. His father had died 14 years ago from a heart attack, a bitter and isolated man who rarely spoke of Elaine. "Dad passed away years ago," he said gently. Relief washed visibly over her features, followed immediately by confusion, as if the emotional mathematics didn't quite compute. "Gone?" she whispered. "Truly gone?" "Yes?" A single tear tracked down her weathered cheek. "Then I hid for nothing." The Baltimore harbor glittered under afternoon sunlight as Garrett walked along the promenade, his phone pressed to his ear. 3 days had passed since his world had imploded at Willow Ridge. "The DNA results are conclusive," Meredith reported. 99.99997% probability that Elaine Warren is your biological mother. Though he'd already known the truth in his heart, scientific confirmation hit like a physical blow. Garrett lowered himself onto a bench, watching boats sway gently in their moorings. "And the other information I requested?" "That's more complicated," Meredith replied. "Her records are fragmented. She appears and disappears across different states, Ohio, Maryland, Connecticut, working mostly service jobs under variations of Elaine Warren, Before 2005, there's almost nothing. As if she was deliberately staying off the grid, Garrett murmured. Exactly. The dementia diagnosis came in 2016 in Cincinnati. There's one more thing. Meredith hesitated. I found hospital records from Baltimore. Multiple admissions between 1979 and 1981. The years before she disappeared. What kind of admissions? Emergency room visits, broken ribs, facial contusions, a fractured wrist. The reports cite household accidents, but they were clearly documented domestic abuse, Garrett finished, bile rising in his throat. After ending the call, he stared at the Chesapeake Bay, trying to reconcile this new information with his childhood memories. His father had always been stern and emotionally distant, but violent. The possibility rewrote his entire history. Baltimore was no accident. After discovering his mother had once lived here, he'd felt compelled to see the city as if its streets might hold forgotten pieces of his own story. Now, standing before the weathered brownstone apartment building from one of her old addresses, the pieces were beginning to form a disturbing picture. Back in his hotel room, Garrett reviewed the diary he'd kept after her disappearance, childish handwriting chronicling his confusion and grief. For years, he'd recorded messages to her, until eventually, the entries stopped. He'd packed away his pain and rebuilt himself as someone who needed no one. The success of Holloway Industries became his identity, achievement his shield against abandonment. The diary's final entry, written on his 14th birthday, stared back at him. Dad says I should accept you're never coming back. He's probably right. I don't need you anyway. The next morning, Garrett returned to Pittsburgh and Willow Ridge, determined to piece together the truth. Dr. Chen, the facility's medical director, had agreed to meet with him. Your mother's condition presents uniquely, Dr. Chen explained. While the dementia is progressing, she experiences periods of remarkable clarity, particularly about distant memories. Recent events fade quickly, but childhood recollections remain accessible. What's her prognosis? Dr. Chen's expression softened. The deterioration will continue. Within a year to 18 months, even long-term memories will become increasingly inaccessible. I'm sorry, Mr. Holloway. The clinical timeline struck Garrett with unexpected force. He'd spent decades believing he had no mother, only to find her with precious little time remaining. In Elaine's room, he found her sorting colored pencils, meticulously arranging them by shade. When she looked up, recognition flickered immediately. Robbie, she smiled. You came back. I did, he said, taking the chair beside her. I'd like to understand what happened before you left. Fear clouded her features. Some days are jumbled. Try, he urged gently. Why did you leave Baltimore? Her hands trembled. Thomas found us there. We had to run again. Us? Garrett leaned forward. Who else was with you? Elaine's gaze drifted to the window, her focus slipping. The little one. Had to protect the little one. You mean me? She looked confused. No, not you. You were safe with your grandparents, had to hide her from him. The world seemed to stop rotating entirely. Her? Garrett's voice cracked. Who is her, Mother? Elaine's eyes cleared momentarily, fixing on his with sudden, piercing lucidity. Your sister, of course, she whispered. Lydia, your twin sister. Dawn painted Cincinnati's skyline in watercolor hues as Garrett's rental car traversed the city's awakening streets. His hands gripped the steering wheel with unnecessary force, his mind still reeling from his mother's revelation 3 days earlier. A twin sister. Lydia. A name for the phantom that had haunted his dreams his entire life. The inexplicable feeling of something missing, someone absent. Following his mother's fragmented clues, he'd tracked down Harold Pines, a modest assisted living facility on Cincinnati's west side where Elaine had stayed before Willow Ridge. The building stood nestled between overgrown sycamores, its brick facade weathered but well-maintained. Mr. Holloway, greeted Diane Foster, the facility's administrator, extending her hand. "This is quite unusual. Most former residents don't have CEOs inquiring about them." "I appreciate you meeting me on short notice," Garrett replied. "I understand my mother lived here from 2016 to 2020? "Yes, until her condition required more specialized care." Diane led him to her office, a cramped space overflowing with paperwork. "I remember Elaine well. Sweet woman, though increasingly confused. She kept to herself mostly except for her Tuesday visitor." Garrett straightened. "She had a visitor? Regular? Like clockwork, every Tuesday afternoon for nearly 4 years?" Diane rifled through a filing cabinet. "A woman, probably mid-40s then. Never left her name in our records." "What did she look like?" Garrett asked, his heart hammering. "Tall, like you. Dark hair with some premature gray. I remember thinking they had the same eyes, though I assumed daughter rather than—" She trailed off, reading his expression. "Do you have security footage?" Diane shook her head. "From 4 years ago? I'm afraid not." "Did she leave anything behind when she transferred? Personal effects? Photographs?" "Just one small box," Diane replied. "When residents transfer, sometimes things get left. We keep them for a few years." She disappeared briefly, returning with a weathered shoebox. This was Elaine's. Inside lay the modest treasures of his mother's recent life. A tarnished locket, several books with dog-eared pages, a hand-knitted scarf. At the bottom, partially hidden, was a newspaper clipping from 2015. The headline read, "Holloway Industries expands, announces new headquarters." His own face stared back from the photograph, alongside Bradford at the groundbreaking ceremony. "She knew who I was," Garrett whispered. Beneath the clipping lay a small envelope. Inside was a school photograph of 2 children, perhaps 5 years old, a boy and girl with identical hazel-green eyes. On the back, written in faded ink, "Robert and Lydia, 1985. The image blurred as unexpected tears filled Garrett's eyes. It was him, unmistakably, alongside a girl who mirrored his features in uncanny ways. Physical proof of a connection he'd never known existed. Later that evening, in his hotel room, Garrett called Bradford. "I need you to find someone," he said without preamble. "A woman named Lydia, possibly using the surname Warren. Approximately my age, likely in the Cincinnati area as of 2020. "Garrett, what's going on? First your mother, now this mysterious woman?" "She's my sister, Brad. My twin sister." Bradford's stunned silence stretched over the line. "That's impossible," he finally said. "You're an only child." "Your father would have—" "My father lied about many things," Garrett interrupted, his voice hard, "including why my mother disappeared." For the first time in their 30-year friendship, Bradford seemed at a loss for words. "I'll put our best people on it," he eventually promised. That night, Garrett dreamed of childhood, not the lonely, achievement-oriented upbringing he'd actually experienced, but a parallel life where a sister's laughter echoed through sunlit rooms. He woke feeling more bereft than ever, mourning the absence of someone he'd never consciously known was missing. The hotel's breakfast remained untouched as he sorted through his mother's belongings again. Something about the locket caught his attention. Working carefully with the tarnished clasp, he managed to open it, revealing 2 tiny photographs inside, one of him as a child, the other of the same girl from the school photo. Turning the locket over, he noticed faint engraving on the back. "Lynn's Jewelry, Portland, Me, Maine." A state that hadn't appeared in any of Elaine's known records. His phone rang. Bradford. "We've got something," his friend said without greeting. "Not a Lydia Warren, but a Lydia Morris, clinical psychologist in Portland, Maine. Graduated University of Maryland, 1999. And Garrett, her clinic website has her photo. She could be your twin. Portland, Maine. The locket." This couldn't be coincidence. "Send me everything," Garrett said, already reaching for his laptop to book a flight. And Bradford? Not a word about this to anyone else. Not yet. What exactly are you hoping to find? Bradford asked cautiously. Garrett stared at the childhood photo, at the sister he should have known. The truth, he answered simply. And the other half of myself. Portland's salty air whipped around Garrett as he stood across from the modest Victorian house that doubled as Morris Family Counseling. The painted sign swung gently in the coastal breeze, featuring an abstract family silhouette. Through the bay window, he glimpsed a receptionist's desk and empty waiting room. For 40 minutes, he'd been frozen in place, rehearsing and discarding opening lines. How does one approach a twin sister who may not know you exist? Every scenario he imagined seemed inadequate for the magnitude of this moment. His phone vibrated, a text from the private investigator he'd hired in Portland. Dr. Morris is seeing her last patient, usually leaves by 5:30 p.m. Garrett checked his watch, 5:17. The churning in his stomach intensified. Then the front door opened, and time stopped. She emerged with a client, speaking reassuringly while gesturing toward the street. Even from this distance, the resemblance was undeniable. The same tall frame, the same facial structure. Her hair, dark with streaks of premature silver like his own, was pulled back in a simple knot. When she smiled at something the client said, Garrett felt a physical jolt of recognition. After the client departed, Lydia returned inside. Minutes later, she re-emerged wearing a light jacket, locking the door behind her. She walked briskly toward the small parking lot beside the building, keys in hand. "Excuse me," Garrett called, his voice surprisingly steady as he approached. "Dr. Morris?" She turned, professional courtesy immediately replacing her distracted expression. "Yes. Can I help you with something?" The moment their eyes met, identical hazel green, her practiced smile faltered. She took an unconscious step backward. "My name is Garrett Holloway," he said, heart thundering. "Though I was born Robert Holloway, I believe we may be related." The color drained from her face. For several seconds, she stared at him with an expression of shock that mirrored what he'd felt discovering his mother. "This isn't possible," she finally whispered. "You can't be here." "I found our mother," Garrett continued gently. "Elaine Warren. She's in a nursing home in Pittsburgh." Lydia's hand flew to her mouth. "Mother is alive. All this time." "You knew about me?" Garrett asked, the question that had consumed him since Cincinnati. The parking lot seemed too public for this conversation. Lydia glanced around nervously, then gestured toward the building. "We should talk inside." Her office was warm and inviting, soft lighting, comfortable furniture, walls the color of sea glass. Children's drawings were framed alongside professional credentials. Photos lined a bookshelf. Lydia with an older man, presumably her husband. Lydia with 2 adolescent boys. Lydia receiving some kind of community award. A life he knew nothing about. A sister who had been living, breathing, existing parallel to him for 43 years. "I've known about you my entire life," Lydia said once they were seated, her voice steadier now though her hands trembled. "Mother always told me I had a twin brother named Robert, who lived with our father. But I never knew about you," Garrett replied, the inequity of this knowledge striking him anew. "My father told me Mother died." Pain flickered across Lydia's face. "I'm not surprised. Thomas Holloway would never admit his wife escaped with one of his children. Why did she take you and not me?" The question hung heavily between them. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "She tried to take us both," she said softly. "That night in Baltimore. I was already in the car when he caught her packing your things. She swallowed hard. "He threatened to kill her if she took you too. Said he'd hunt them down if she ever contacted you." The revelation struck Garrett like physical violence. His entire understanding of his childhood, of his life, crumbled further. "So she chose to save one child, rather than risk losing both," he concluded, voice hollow. "She didn't choose me over you," Lydia corrected firmly. "She had no choice at all. She assumed you would be safer with him than on the run." that his love for his son would protect you from his rage. And you? Where did you go? Everywhere. Nowhere for long. New names in each place. Always looking over our shoulders until I was 18. Lydia's gaze drifted to a photograph of the older man. Then Walter Morris found us in Cincinnati. A widower with a kind heart. He married Mother, adopted me, gave us both stability for the first time. He knew your situation? Everything. He helped Mother heal, at least partially. Lydia's expression darkened. When did you say you found her? And how bad is the dementia? A week ago. It's advanced, but with periods of clarity. Lydia nodded sadly. I've been searching for her for 3 years. After Walter died, she started slipping cognitively. One day she wandered off. By the time I tracked her to that Cincinnati facility, she'd already been transferred elsewhere. The records were sealed due to some legal guardianship issue. The pieces clicked into place. That's why you visited her every Tuesday. You knew where she was until 2020. Surprise flickered across her face. How did you? I've been retracing her steps, Garrett explained. What happened in 2020? COVID protocols. The facility closed to visitors. When they reopened, she was gone, transferred without notice. Lydia's voice cracked. I've been looking ever since. Garrett reached into his pocket and withdrew the childhood photograph. I found this among her things. Lydia accepted it with trembling fingers, a sob escaping as she recognized the image. She kept this all these years. Did she ever try to find me? To contact me? Garrett couldn't keep the hurt from his voice. Lydia met his gaze directly. Every birthday, every Christmas, she wrote you letters she could never send. She collected newspaper articles about you. When Holloway Industries began appearing in national news, she would show me, so proud her son had succeeded, despite everything. But she never reached out. She was terrified. Even after we learned Thomas had died, she worried about putting you in danger somehow. The trauma. Lydia hesitated. And then, when she finally gathered the courage to find you, the dementia began. The tragic timing of it all struck Garrett with devastating force. Decades of separation enforced by fear, followed by illness, just as that fear might have been overcome. I'd like to take you to her, he said after a moment, before her condition deteriorates further. Lydia nodded, tears flowing freely now. I need to see her. And Garrett? Yes? Thank you for finding us both. The private jet cut through cloud cover as they descended toward Pittsburgh. Lydia sat across from Garrett, her gaze fixed on the city emerging below. 24 hours earlier, they'd been strangers. Now they were hurtling toward a reunion 4 decades overdue. I never flew private before, she remarked with a small smile, though I suppose having a billionaire brother comes with perks. The casual acknowledgement of their relationship still felt surreal to Garrett. The family resemblance would be hard to explain to other passengers, he replied. Indeed, sitting opposite each other highlighted their twinship in startling detail. The same angular features, identical expressions of contemplative focus. Only her softer jawline and the different paths their lives had taken distinguished them. Tell me about your boys, Garrett prompted, gesturing to her phone wallpaper. Ethan and Noah, Lydia's face brightened. 17 and 15. Ethan's headed to college next year, looking at engineering programs. Noah's the artistic one, music, painting, anything creative. They know about their grandmother. They know she existed and disappeared, not the full story. Lydia's expression sobered. I never told them about you. It seemed cruel to speak of an uncle they'd never meet. The unspoken question hung between them. What happened next? After this crisis, after their mother, would they remain in each other's lives? As the plane touched down, Lydia's phone chimed with a text. My husband sends his regards, she said. He's explaining to the boys why their mother suddenly flew across the country. Will they meet her? Garrett asked carefully. Before she... I hope so, Lydia answered, her clinical detachment briefly faltering. If today goes well, they should know where they come from. Where they come from. The phrase resonated uncomfortably. Garrett had built his identity without ancestral foundations, or so he'd thought. Now he wondered how many of his traits, his tendencies, even his business acumen, might have roots in genetics rather than self-determination. At Willow Ridge, Dr. Chen was waiting. Mrs. Warren is having a relatively good day, he reported. Though I should warn you both, emotional triggers can sometimes exacerbate confusion. Outside Elaine's room, Lydia hesitated. I haven't seen her in almost 3 years, she whispered. What if she doesn't recognize me? She recognized me after 38 years, Garrett reassured her, though uncertainty clouded his own mind. They entered together. Elaine sat in an armchair by the window, a nurse helping her with a simple jigsaw puzzle. When she looked up, her expression transformed from polite attention to astonishment. Lydia? She gasped. My Lydia? Yes, Mom. Lydia rushed forward, kneeling beside the chair. It's me. Elaine's trembling hands reached for her daughter's face, tracing its contours as if confirming reality through touch. They told me you couldn't find me anymore, she said, voice breaking. I waited every Tuesday. I never stopped looking, Lydia assured her, tears flowing freely. Elaine's gaze shifted, noticing Garrett standing nearby. For a moment, confusion clouded her features, then cleared with remarkable lucidity. Robbie, she whispered, you found each other. We did, Mother, Garrett confirmed, moving closer. Elaine looked from one to the other, wonder spreading across her weathered features. My children. Together. She grasped for both their hands, drawing them closer. After all this time. For nearly an hour they sat together, Elaine alternating between perfect clarity and confused tangents. She recalled Lydia's childhood on the run, constant relocations, odd jobs, poverty, with heartbreaking detail. Then, just as suddenly, she'd ask Garrett about school events decades past, as if she'd seen him just yesterday. During one clear moment, she fixed Garrett with an intense gaze. You built those big buildings. I saw in the newspaper. Yes, he confirmed, strangely moved that she'd followed his career. Holloway Industries. His name, she frowned. Why keep his name? The question struck deeper than she likely intended. Why had he carried forward the Holloway legacy, building a monument to a man who had deceived him his entire life? It was the only connection I had left, he answered honestly. I thought you were gone forever. Regret and sorrow etched deeper lines into Elaine's already weathered face. I wanted to come back for you, she whispered. Every day I wanted to come back. Why didn't you? The question escaped before Garrett could temper it, raw with decades of abandonment. Lydia tensed beside him, but Elaine merely closed her eyes briefly. He said he'd kill me if I tried, she answered simply. And then who would protect Lydia? Who would remember you needed saving too? The brutal honesty silenced them all. Into this heavy quiet, Elaine continued, her voice stronger. He broke more than my bones, Robbie. He broke something inside me. The fear never left. Her gaze drifted to the window. Even after Walter helped me heal. Even after the newspapers said Thomas died, the fear stayed. Garrett felt something shift within himself. Decades of resentment giving way to a more complicated understanding. His mother hadn't abandoned him. She'd been forced into an impossible choice by a man whose violence had shaped all their lives. I couldn't save you both, Elaine whispered, tears streaming. Forgive me, Robbie, my beautiful boy. I couldn't save you both. Without conscious thought, Garrett found himself kneeling before her, his head resting in her lap like the child he'd once been. Her fingers, gnarled with age but infinitely gentle, stroked his hair. There's nothing to forgive, he managed through his own tears. You survived. You protected Lydia. And now we're together. For a precious moment, The fractured family existed in perfect harmony. Mother and twins, separated by decades of trauma, but connected by blood and newly discovered love. Then Elaine's hand stilled. When Garrett looked up, her expression had clouded over. "Who are you people?" she asked, fear replacing recognition. "Where's Walter?" "I need Walter." Dr. Chen, who had been monitoring from the doorway, stepped forward. "I think that's enough for today," he said gently. "These episodes can be distressing for everyone." As they prepared to leave, Elaine suddenly grabbed Garrett's sleeve. "The box," she said urgently, a flash of clarity returning. "Tell them about the box in Portland." "What box, Mother?" Lydia asked, leaning close. But Elaine had retreated into confusion again, her focus turning back to the half-finished puzzle as if they were already gone. "She must mean Walter's safety deposit box," Lydia explained as they drove from Willow Ridge toward Garrett's penthouse. "He maintained one at Coastal Savings in downtown Portland. After he died, we couldn't find the key." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Pittsburgh's hills. After the emotional intensity of seeing their mother, both siblings seemed drained, processing in their own ways. "What would be in it?" Garrett asked, navigating traffic with mechanical precision. "I'm not sure," Lydia admitted. Walter was methodical about documentation, perhaps records from their marriage, adoption papers, maybe financial information. "Or evidence about our father," Garrett suggested grimly. "Mother's injuries, police reports that were never filed." Lydia's silence confirmed his suspicion. Neither had fully articulated the darkness at the center of their family story, the violence that had driven their mother to such desperate measures. At the penthouse, Meredith had arranged dinner from an upscale restaurant, then discreetly withdrawn to give the siblings privacy. They ate quietly on the terrace overlooking the city, the enormity of their shared history creating both connection and distance. "You built all this from nothing," Lydia observed, gesturing toward the glittering skyline where several Holloway Industries buildings stood prominently. "Not nothing," Garrett corrected. "Father left me a modest steel business. I expanded it. Still, it's impressive." She studied him thoughtfully. "Though I wonder what it cost you." "Meaning?" "No wedding photos anywhere," Lydia noted. "No evidence of a personal life at all, actually." The observation stung with its accuracy. "Relationships haven't been my strong suit," he admitted. 2 failed engagements. Work filled the spaces. "The spaces where family should have been?" she suggested gently, her psychologist's insight uncomfortably perceptive. Garrett didn't answer directly. "What about you? Your family seems picture perfect." "It took years of therapy to trust anyone," Lydia replied candidly. "Our childhood leaves marks, Garrett. Different for each of us, but permanent." The next morning found them on Garrett's jet again, bound for Portland and whatever secrets Walter Morris had locked away. They landed just after noon, heading directly to Coastal Savings in the city's business district. The bank manager, appropriately impressed by Garrett's credentials and Lydia's documentation, led them to a private room where the safety deposit box would be brought. "We'll need to drill it open," he explained. "Without the original key." "Try this," Garrett interrupted, producing the key he'd found tucked inside the locket from his mother's possessions. The manager's eyebrows rose, but he accepted the small key. Minutes later, they sat alone with a rectangular metal box between them. "You should open it," Garrett said. "Walter was your father, legally, if not biologically." Lydia nodded, lifting the lid slowly. Inside lay several manila envelopes, neatly labeled in precise handwriting. Elaine's medical records, Lydia's adoption, Thomas Holloway, evidence, letters to Robert. They both stared at the last folder. Lydia removed it carefully, placing it before Garrett. "These were meant for you," Lydia said softly. With hands that weren't quite steady, Garrett opened the envelope. Inside were dozens of letters, each dated and addressed simply to "My Robert." The earliest was marked with his 6th birthday, just months after Elaine's disappearance. The most recent was dated only 4 years ago, before her dementia had fully taken hold. She wrote to me every year, he whispered, the magnitude of this discovery overwhelming him. For 38 years. She never stopped loving you, Lydia confirmed. Never stopped thinking about you. Garrett removed one letter at random from his 18th birthday. My dearest Robert, today you are a man. I wonder what you look like now, if you have your father's height or my eyes. I wonder if you've kept your love of drawing. I wonder if you hate me for not being there to see you grow. I pray your father has softened. I pray he's told you the truth, though I fear he hasn't. I pray most of all that you are happy and whole despite my absence. Lydia graduated high school last month. She looks more like you every day, though she's never met you. Sometimes she catches me staring and knows I'm seeing you both in my mind. One day, when it's safe, I'll find you. I'll explain everything. Until then, know that not a day passes when I don't think of you, miss you, love you. Forever your mother. Elaine tears blurred Garrett's vision. All those years believing himself abandoned, unloved, when these letters, heartfelt messages he never received, had chronicled his mother's enduring love and impossible situation. There's more, Lydia said quietly, opening the folder labeled Thomas Holloway, Evidence. Inside was a horrifying documentation of abuse, hospital records with photographs of Elaine's injuries, police reports that had been filed but never pursued, and statements from neighbors who had witnessed incidents but were intimidated into silence by Thomas Holloway's wealth and influence. He was a monster, Garrett whispered, scanning the documents with growing horror. The father he'd known, stern, demanding, emotionally distant, had hidden an even darker reality. Walter collected these over years, Lydia explained. Mother was too traumatized to talk about it, but Walter wanted documentation in case Thomas ever tried to find us. Why keep it after he died? Insurance, I suppose. Or maybe closure that never came. Lydia placed her hand over Garrett's. I'm sorry. This must be difficult, reconciling the father you knew with this evidence. Garrett thought of his childhood, the high expectations, the conditional approval based on achievements, the emotional manipulation disguised as parenting. While he'd never experienced the physical violence his mother had endured, he recognized now that he'd suffered under the same controlling, destructive influence. What do we do with all this? He asked finally. We take it with us, Lydia answered simply. It's our history, however painful. And someday my sons, your nephews, might need to understand where they come from too. That evening, in Lydia's modest home, Garrett met his brother-in-law James and his teenage nephews. The initial awkwardness of explaining his sudden appearance in their lives dissolved into a strange, bittersweet family gathering. So you're like, what, a secret uncle? Asked Noah, the younger boy, his eyes reflecting the same hazel green that marked their shared genetics. I suppose I am, Garrett replied, finding unexpected comfort in the designation. And you own those big buildings we see in business magazines? Ethan, the older nephew, seemed more reserved but equally curious. Some of them. Cool, both boys declared in unison. Later, when the boys had gone to bed, Garrett, Lydia, and James sat on the back porch overlooking the small garden. The coastal night was cool, stars emerging above the distant sound of the Atlantic. You're welcome to stay as long as you need, James offered. This is a lot to process. Garrett nodded gratefully. I'd like to make arrangements for Mother, he said. The facility in Pittsburgh is adequate, but I want her closer to family. Both families. What are you suggesting? Lydia asked. A private care facility, halfway between Portland and Pittsburgh. The best specialists, around-the-clock attention. Garrett had been formulating the plan since leaving the bank. I can have my people find somewhere suitable, unless you'd prefer she come live with you. Lydia shook her head reluctantly. With her condition, home care wouldn't be sufficient. But I want to be able to visit regularly, not just once a year. Then we'll find somewhere that works for both of us, Garrett promised. As the conversation continued, plans emerging and connections strengthening, Garrett felt something shift within himself. a lifetime of carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. For the first time in nearly 4 decades, he wasn't alone in the world. The Berkshire Hills of western Massachusetts blazed with autumn color as Garrett's car wound along country roads toward the newly established Holloway Morris Care Center. Elaine had been transferred 3 weeks earlier to this private facility located almost precisely halfway between Pittsburgh and Portland. Behind him, Bradford expertly navigated the curves while speaking into his phone, finalizing details for tomorrow's board meeting in Boston. "The expansion proposal looks solid," Bradford reported after ending the call. "Financials check out, environmental impact statements all green-lit. We should have board approval by noon." Garrett nodded absently, his attention on the approaching facility nestled among maples and oaks. The modern building, with its broad windows and central courtyard, had been purpose-built with his mother's condition in mind, specialized memory care combined with physical rehabilitation and comfort. "You're not listening to a word I'm saying," Bradford observed, not unkindly. "Sorry," Garrett replied. "Just thinking." "About your mother? Or your surprise sister?" "Both. Neither." Garrett sighed. About how quickly everything can change. Bradford, who had been Garrett's closest friend since college, studied him thoughtfully. "You know, in 20 years, I've never seen you take this much personal time. It's refreshing." "Refreshing?" Garrett raised an eyebrow. "You were becoming a machine, Garrett. All business, no life. Even I was getting worried." The observation struck uncomfortably close to home. Before finding Elaine, Garrett had been exclusively defined by Holloway Industries. His calendar, managed meticulously by Meredith, had been filled with meetings, acquisitions, and expansions, leaving no room for personal connections. Now his schedule included regular flights to Massachusetts, weekend visits to Portland, and long phone conversations with Lydia about their mother's care and their gradually emerging relationship. At the facility entrance, they were greeted by Dr. Miriam Patel, the neurologist Garrett had personally recruited from Johns Hopkins to oversee Elaine's care. "Mr. Holloway, perfect timing," she said warmly. "Your mother is having a very good day. Cognitive function tests show marked improvement since the medication adjustments." "And long-term?" Garrett asked, the question that haunted him constantly. Dr. Patel's expression softened. "The progression remains inevitable, but we're seeing significant slowing. The quality care, regular visits from family, these things make a measurable difference." Inside, they found Elaine in the sunroom, working with an art therapist. When she looked up and saw Garrett, her face brightened immediately. "There's my boy," she called, extending her hands. The easy recognition was still a gift he treasured, knowing each lucid interaction might eventually become rarer. "Hello, Mother," he said, bending to kiss her cheek. "You look well today." "They're letting me paint again," she said proudly, indicating her watercolor, a surprisingly skilled rendering of a New England landscape. "I used to paint all the time before Thomas, before the running and hiding, before life intervened and stole decades they could have shared." "It's beautiful," Garrett told her sincerely. "Lydia called this morning," Elaine continued. "She and the boys are coming tomorrow. Family dinner." "I know," Garrett smiled. "I'm staying overnight to join you." Elaine beamed, then noticed Bradford hanging back respectfully. "And who's this handsome gentleman?" "This is Bradford Hayes, my oldest friend and business partner," Garrett introduced. "Oh yes, Bradford," Elaine nodded, surprising them both with her recollection. "You were in the newspaper with Robbie when they opened the new building." Bradford looked startled, then genuinely touched. "That's right, Mrs. Holloway, the Pittsburgh headquarters." "Warren," she corrected gently. "I went back to Warren after. The afternoon passed pleasantly, with Elaine maintaining remarkable clarity. They had lunch in the private dining room Garrett had arranged, then took a supervised walk through the grounds, autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet. Later, When Elaine tired and returned to her room for a rest, Bradford pulled Garrett aside. "I've never seen this side of you," he observed. "Patient, gentle, almost peaceful." Garrett considered this. "I feel like I'm meeting myself for the first time," he admitted. "The person I might have been without all the armor I built." Bradford nodded thoughtfully. "The board meeting tomorrow. You don't need to be there. I can handle it." "No, I'll be there," Garrett assured him. "But I'll come back here afterward. Family dinner, remember?" The word family still felt foreign on his tongue, but increasingly right. The next evening, Garrett watched his newly discovered family gathered around the private dining table. Lydia deep in conversation with Dr. Patel about recent dementia research. James helping Elaine with her meal when her hands trembled too much to manage alone. Ethan and Noah showing their grandmother photographs from their school activities. An unexpected lump formed in his throat. This was what he'd missed his entire life. Not just his mother and sister, but the sense of belonging to something larger than himself. Something not built on achievement or acquisition. "Uncle Garrett," Noah called. The title still new but used with increasing ease. "Mom says you never took a real vacation. Is that true?" Garrett smiled at his nephew's directness. "Not exactly true. I've traveled extensively for business." Noah rolled his eyes with teenage expertise. "That's not a vacation. That's just work in a different place." "Noah," Lydia admonished gently. "He's right," Garrett conceded. "I can't remember the last time I traveled purely for pleasure." "We go to Cape Cod every summer," Ethan joined in. "You should come with us next year." The casual invitation, the assumption that he would remain in their lives long term, affected Garrett more deeply than he expected. "I'd like that," he replied simply. Later, as evening settled over the facility and Elaine began showing signs of fatigue, Garrett helped her back to her room. As he turned to leave, she caught his hand. "I read your letters," she said, her voice suddenly stronger. "All of them. The ones Walter kept." Garrett froze. "You remember that?" She nodded, her eyes clear and focused. "Some days I remember everything. Some days nothing. Today is a good day." He sat beside her bed, holding her frail hand in his. "I wish I'd received them when you wrote them." "So do I," she whispered. "But you know now. You know I never stopped loving you." "I know," he assured her. "There's something else you should know," she continued, her expression intensifying. "Your father, he wasn't always that way. When we first met, he was kind, charming. The violence came later, gradually." Garrett tensed, uncertain why she was telling him this now. "I see him in you sometimes," she said, and his heart sank until she continued. "The good parts, the intelligence, the determination. But I worry." "About what?" "That you've let his legacy define you too much. Holloway Industries, the empire you built on his name." Her fingers tightened around his. "You are more than his son, Robert. You are my son too, and Lydia's brother, and those boys' uncle." The simplicity and power of her statement struck him profoundly. All his life, he'd been running from abandonment by building walls of success and self-sufficiency. Now his mother was offering him a different identity, one based on connection rather than achievement. "I don't know how to be those things," he admitted quietly. "I only know how to be CEO Garrett Holloway." Elaine smiled sadly. "Then perhaps it's time to learn while we still have time." As he left her room, her words echoed in his mind. Outside, he found Lydia waiting. "Everything okay?" she asked, concern evident in her expression, so like his own. "She's having a remarkably lucid evening," Garrett replied. "She's been giving me life advice." Lydia smiled. "That sounds like the mother I remember. What wisdom did she impart?" "That I need to be more than just Thomas Holloway's son and successor." Understanding dawned in Lydia's eyes. The identity crisis finally hits. "Is that your professional assessment, Doctor?" "Morris," Garrett asked, with a hint of the dry humor they'd discovered they shared. "That, and the observation of someone who went through something similar," she replied. "After Walter found us, after we stopped running, I had to figure out who Lydia Morris was. Not just a scared girl hiding with her mother." They walked together toward the facility's garden, the autumn evening crisp around them. "How did you do it?" Garrett asked after a moment. "Slowly, painfully, with help." Lydia glanced at him. "And by making conscious choices about who I wanted to become, rather than letting circumstances dictate my identity." The words resonated deeply with Garrett as they continued their walk in companionable silence. Two halves of a whole finally reunited, both still healing from wounds inflicted decades before. Winter descended on Pittsburgh, blanketing Holloway Industries' headquarters in pristine white. In his top-floor office, Garrett stood before the wall of windows, watching snowflakes swirl against the city skyline. Behind him, Bradford and the executive team waited expectantly, their expressions ranging from confusion to concern. "You want to what?" Bradford finally broke the stunned silence following Garrett's announcement. "Rename the company," Garrett repeated calmly, turning to face them. "Warren Holloway Enterprises has a good ring to it, don't you think?" "But the Holloway brand is established globally," protested Vanessa Chen, head of marketing. "The rebranding costs alone would be astronomical." "I'm aware," Garrett acknowledged. "But sometimes cost isn't the most important consideration." 3 months had passed since the family dinner at the care facility. In that time, Garrett had divided his weeks between Pittsburgh, Massachusetts, and occasional weekend visits to Portland. The dual existence had been exhausting, but transformative. Elaine had experienced several significant cognitive declines, each one leaving her with slightly less connection to present reality. The episodes Dr. Patel had warned about were becoming more frequent, days when she recognized no one, when decades-old memories seemed more real than the present. These precious, diminishing moments of clarity had accelerated Garrett's own internal transformation. Each visit might be the last time his mother truly knew him. Each conversation potentially their final meaningful exchange. "This isn't just about a name," he explained to his bewildered executives. "It's about acknowledging the complete legacy of this company, both sides of its origin." "The board will resist," Bradford cautioned, though his expression had softened with understanding. "They're traditionalists." "Then they'll need to be persuaded," Garrett replied simply. "Or replaced." The meeting concluded shortly after, with action items assigned and a rebranding committee established despite ongoing reservations. As the executives filed out, Bradford remained behind. "This is about more than adding your mother's name, isn't it?" he asked once they were alone. Garrett nodded, returning to the window. "I've built my entire identity around being Thomas Holloway's son and successor. I need to acknowledge I'm Elaine Warren's child too, and all that entails." "Including the abuse? The lies?" Bradford asked carefully. "That's a complicated legacy to incorporate into a corporate identity." "Exactly why it needs to be done," Garrett replied. "No more hiding uncomfortable truths. No more pretending the Holloway name represents only success and achievement." The conversation shifted to implementation details, but underneath ran a current of something more personal. Bradford witnessing his oldest friend undergo a fundamental transformation. 2 days later, Garrett's private jet touched down in Portland. This visit wasn't to see Elaine, who was having a difficult week according to Dr. Patel, but to attend a special event at Lydia's invitation. The community theater was modest but charming, filled with parents and supporters for the high school winter music showcase. Garrett found himself seated beside Lydia and James, a program in hand featuring Noah's name prominently. "He's playing an original composition," Lydia explained, maternal pride evident in her voice. "He won't tell us anything about it, wants it to be a surprise." As the showcase progressed through various student performances, Garrett found himself unexpectedly moved. These ordinary moments of community and family, teenagers performing, parents beaming proudly, represented a life entirely different from his own achievement-driven existence. When Noah took the stage, adjusting the microphone before sitting at the piano, a hush fell over the audience. The boy, his nephew, Garrett reminded himself with still fresh wonder, seemed momentarily nervous before his gaze found his family in the audience. Seeing Garrett alongside his parents, Noah smiled slightly, then began to play. The composition started softly, a melancholy melody that gradually built in complexity and emotion. There was something hauntingly familiar about it, a thread of sadness intertwined with tentative hope, building towards something unresolved yet beautiful. When the final notes faded, the audience erupted in applause. Beside him, Lydia wiped tears from her eyes. "That was incredible," Garrett told her sincerely. At the reception afterward, Noah approached somewhat shyly. "What did you think?" he asked, addressing Garrett directly. "I think you're extraordinarily talented," Garrett replied honestly. The piece was moving. It felt familiar somehow. Noah exchanged a glance with his mother before explaining. "I wrote it about Grandma Elaine, about her story, being separated from her children, one hidden, one lost. I called it Found." The simple explanation struck Garrett deeply. This boy, who had only recently learned the full family history, had processed it through art rather than anger or denial. He had transformed trauma into beauty. "I'm honored to have heard it," Garrett said, his voice rougher than intended. Later that evening, after the boys had gone to bed, Garrett sat with Lydia and James in their living room, nursing a glass of scotch as snow fell gently outside. "Noah's piece got me thinking," Garrett began. "About legacy, about what we pass down through generations." "Heavy thoughts," James commented with a gentle smile. "I've been focused on material legacy my entire life, building Holloway Industries bigger than my father did, accumulating wealth, securing my place in business history." Garrett stared into his glass. "But what Noah created tonight, that's a different kind of legacy altogether." Lydia studied her twin thoughtfully. "What are you really saying, Garrett?" "I'm changing the company name," he said, "to Warren Holloway Enterprises, and I'm establishing a foundation in Mother's name, focused on domestic violence survivors and their children." Lydia's eyes widened. "That's significant." "It's overdue," he corrected. "And there's more. I want your input on the foundation's direction. Your professional expertise would be invaluable." The conversation continued late into the night, plans taking shape for a shared legacy that acknowledged their painful past while creating something healing for the future. The next morning, as Garrett prepared to return to Pittsburgh, Noah approached him with a small, wrapped package. "It's a recording of last night's piece," he explained, "and some other compositions. I thought maybe you could play them for Grandma Elaine? Music sometimes helps people with dementia connect." Garrett accepted the gift, touched by the thoughtfulness. "I'll make sure she hears them." "Uncle Garrett?" Noah hesitated. "Mom said you never had kids of your own." "That's right," Garrett confirmed, wondering where this was leading. "Was that because of what happened? Because your dad was—" The teenager struggled to find appropriate words. "Abusive?" Garrett supplied gently. "Perhaps partly. I told myself I was too busy, too focused on the company. But truthfully, I think I was afraid of what kind of father I might be." Noah considered this with surprising maturity. "But you're nothing like him. At least, not the bad parts Mom told us about." "How can you be so sure?" Garrett asked, genuinely curious about his nephew's perspective. "Because you came looking for your mom after all those years," Noah said simply. "Because you didn't have to include us in your life, but you did. Because you listen when people talk instead of making them afraid." The observation, delivered with teenage directness but profound insight, left Garrett momentarily speechless. "Thank you," he finally said. "That means more than you know." As his car pulled away from the Morris home, Garrett found himself contemplating Noah's words and the unexpected directions his life had taken in just a few months. From isolated CEO to brother, uncle, and son, roles he was still learning to navigate, but which increasingly felt more authentic than any corporate title he'd ever held. His phone chimed with a message from Dr. Patel. "Mrs. Warren, having a very good morning. Asking for you and Lydia. Good time to visit, if possible." Without hesitation, Garrett instructed his driver to head to the private airfield. Pittsburgh would have to wait. Some priorities had become abundantly clear. Spring sunshine streamed through the windows of the Berkshire facility, casting warm light across Elaine's room where family had gathered. At 72, her physical health had stabilized, though her cognitive decline continued its inevitable progression. Today, however, was one of the increasingly rare good days, a gift they had all learned to treasure. Garrett sat beside her wheelchair, Lydia on the opposite side. Around them, James helped arrange a small cake, while Ethan and Noah hung a handmade banner reading, "Happy 1-year anniversary of being found." "Is all this fuss really necessary?" Elaine asked, though her smile belied any genuine complaint. "Absolutely necessary," Garrett confirmed, squeezing her hand gently. "1 year ago today, I walked into Willow Ridge Nursing Home and found the mother I thought I'd lost forever. And I found my brother again," Lydia added, adjusting the light blanket across their mother's lap. "And we got a cool uncle who lets us fly on his private jet," Noah chimed in, earning chuckles from everyone. The past year had brought changes none of them could have anticipated. Warren Holloway Enterprises had successfully rebranded, weathering initial market skepticism to emerge stronger. The Elaine Warren Foundation had launched with substantial funding, already establishing programs in 3 states to support families affected by domestic violence. Professionally, Garrett had surprised everyone, including himself, by gradually stepping back from day-to-day operations, elevating Bradford to CEO, while transitioning himself to chairman. The shift had allowed him time for what he now understood mattered most: these fleeting moments with the family he'd only just discovered. "I have something for you," Garrett told his mother, producing a small wrapped package. Elaine unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate silver locket, an exact replica of the one she'd kept all those years, but new and gleaming. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside were tiny photographs. On one side, the childhood picture of the twins. On the other, a recent photo of all of them together at Christmas. "Oh," Elaine breathed, tears welling in her eyes. "Past and present." "Then something else," Garrett added, helping her turn the locket over. Engraved on the back were the words, "The circle complete, at last." The celebration continued through the afternoon, a quiet family gathering that would have seemed impossibly ordinary to Garrett's former self. They shared memories, Lydia recounting stories from their years on the move, Garrett describing his first major business success, the boys talking about school and friends. As evening approached, Elaine began showing signs of fatigue, though her lucidity remained. While the others packed leftover cake, she beckoned Garrett closer. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice lower but surprisingly firm. "In case I forget again." "What is it?" he asked, leaning in. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "Not for your buildings or your money, for finding us, for changing, for letting yourself be found too." The words struck deep. "I had a lot of catching up to do," he admitted. "We all did," she replied. "Life took so much from us, but look what we've built anyway." She gestured toward the room where Lydia was laughing at something Noah had said, where Ethan was showing James something on his phone, the family that had formed despite decades of separation and pain. "I have regrets," she continued, her gaze momentarily distant. "So many things I would do differently." "Don't," Garrett said gently. "What matters is where we are now." She focused on him again, reaching to touch his face with trembling fingers. "You have your father's determination," she observed. "But your heart, that comes from me. Never forget that part of your legacy." After saying their goodbyes, with promises to return soon, the extended family walked together toward the parking area. The spring evening was mild, trees budding with new life around them. "Will you come to Portland this weekend?" Lydia asked as they reached their vehicles. Ethan has a science competition Saturday. Wouldn't miss it, Garrett assured her. As he watched them drive away, his sister, brother-in-law, and nephews, Garrett felt a sense of peace that had eluded him his entire adult life. The ache of abandoned child had gradually transformed into the contentment of connected adult. His phone rang, Bradford, with updates about the Foundation's newest initiative. As Garrett discussed logistics, he found himself smiling at how seamlessly his two worlds had finally begun to merge. The driven businessman and the rediscovered son and brother no longer at odds but aspects of a more complete self. 2 days later, Garrett stood before the newly installed sign at company headquarters. Warren Holloway Enterprises, the new logo incorporating elements that symbolized both family lines. Bradford joined him, coffee in hand. The quarterly numbers came in. We're up 17% despite the rebranding costs. I never doubted it, Garrett replied. The board wants to know if you'll reconsider your reduced role, Bradford continued. They miss having you in every meeting, terrorizing the competition, Garrett chuckled. Tell them the chairman is exactly where he needs to be. Besides, you're doing an excellent job. Not the same without you breathing down everyone's neck, Bradford observed with a smile. But you seem content. Never thought I'd use that word to describe Garrett Holloway. Neither did I, Garrett admitted. Turns out there's more to life than quarterly earnings. As they walked into the building, Garrett's thoughts turned to the weekend ahead. Ethan's science competition, dinner with Lydia's family, a Sunday visit to his mother. Simple family activities that now anchored his life in ways that multi-million-dollar deals never had. That evening, alone in his penthouse, which now displayed family photographs alongside his business achievements, Garrett opened one of his mother's decades-old letters. My dearest Robert, today you turn 30. I imagine you as a successful man by now, perhaps with a family of your own. Do you ever wonder about me? Do you think of the mother who disappeared from your life? Do you hate her for leaving? I hope someday you'll understand it was love, not abandonment, that forced me away. I hope someday we might find each other again. And I can tell you how not a single day passed without thoughts of you, prayers for you, love for you. Until then, know that you are always whole and complete in my heart, even when separated by impossible distances. Forever your mother, Elaine. The letter, written 13 years ago when both sender and recipient believed reunion impossible, now read like a prophecy fulfilled. Against all odds, across decades of separation, a fractured family had found its way back together, not unchanged, not unscathed, but intact in the ways that mattered most. Garrett placed the letter carefully back among his most treasured possessions, not the awards or recognitions that had once defined him, but these paper testaments to a mother's enduring love and a family's remarkable resilience. In the quiet of evening, he found himself contemplating the journey of the past year, from successful but isolated CEO to reconnected son, brother, and uncle, from a man defined by his father's legacy to one who had embraced his mother's as well, from building empires of steel and glass to helping construct something far more precious, bonds of family that even decades of separation couldn't permanently sever. The rich man who had made a donation to a nursing home had found infinitely more than he'd ever thought possible. Not just a mother missing for 38 years, but the pieces of himself that had been missing too. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries aren't found in achievement or acquisition, but in reconnection with the parts of ourselves and others that circumstances have separated. No matter how much time has passed or how permanent a loss may seem, healing remains possible when we open ourselves to emotional truths and allow vulnerability to exist alongside strength. Our identities are not fixed by our past traumas or defined solely by our public accomplishments. They remain fluid, capable of transformation through love, forgiveness, and the courage to embrace the connections we've been missing. True wealth is measured not in material success, but in the strength of our bonds with others and our willingness to integrate all parts of our story, even the painful ones, into a more complete understanding of who we are and who we might yet become. Did this story move your heart? Let us know in the comments. What rating would you give from 0 to 10? Your feedback helps us create even better stories. Also, tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and keep enjoying more emotional stories. Just click here on the end screen. Thank you for being part of this moment with us.